My next guest is named Larry Lockman. He was first elected to the Maine House of Representatives in 2012. He is now serving in his fourth term. In 2015, he co-founded the conservative nonprofit Maine First Project to train candidates and activists how to fight fire with fire and make Maine great again. In January of this year, as I mentioned earlier, he proposed a legislation drafted by the David Horowitz Freedom Center to require K-12 public school teachers in Maine to abide by a code of ethics banning political indoctrination in the classroom. And this guy has been through hell and back. Please welcome Representative Larry Lockman.
Thank you, Lonnie. I want to begin by saying what an honor it is to be here today, and what an honor it is to finally meet David Horowitz. I've been a big fan of David Horowitz for over half a century. When I was a sophomore in college, I was a subscriber to Ramparts magazine. David was the editor. I was in my late teens, he was in his late 20s. And then over the next decade or two, we each, traveling on kind of parallel paths, had what David calls sober second thoughts about the progressive worldview. So I'm happy to say more than 50 years later, David and I are still comrades in arms, only now we are on the right side of history, and we are on the side of light shining in darkness. Thank you, and God bless you, David Horowitz, for all the work. So I think we've all kind of suspected that there's a left-wing bias in the K-12 public education system, but most of the evidence is kind of anecdotal. So this really hit home for me nearly 4 years ago, December 2015. An assistant principal at Camden Hills Regional High School, mid-coastal Maine, posted this Facebook message. The only terrorists we need to fear are white Christian men with easy access to guns. Vote Bernie. That is all. Have a nice day. So in one short sentence, this guy spewed out a perfect trifecta of racist, sexist, Christophobic hate-mongering. His outburst did get statewide media coverage and even some national media coverage, but the superintendent and the rest of the administration circled the wagons around the perpetrator. He kept his job. But it proved to me that, yes, identity politics is alive and well. But I wondered at the time, how much of this crap spills over from the faculty lounge into the classroom? So fast forward to February of 2018, last year, in the aftermath of the Parkland shootings. Teachers at several high schools in the Portland, Maine area facilitated a student walkout in a demonstration aimed at passage of more restrictive firearms legislation. School officials helped plan the rally and even offered to modify the school schedule to accommodate the anti-gun lobbyist who was speaking at the event. The following week, many parents contacted the administration to voice their concern, their protest, their outrage at what had happened. They were ignored. No corrective action was taken. So when I heard about the Freedom Center's draft legislation to ban K-12 political indoctrination, I was all in. I sponsored the bill in January, and a public hearing was held in late February of this year. Not surprisingly, the teachers' union and the ACLU showed up to voice their loud opposition, but they couldn't seem to get on the same page with a consistent message. The union bosses insisted that teachers never engage in political advocacy in the classroom. But the ACLU defended the right of teachers to do exactly that. We also heard testimony from parents about the bullying of their children by teachers during the walkout last year. And Here's an excerpt from that testimony. A student described what happened in her class as follows. At the appointed time, no students walked out, so the teacher stopped talking, looked at the clock, and said, "Aren't you supposed to be walking out?" That induced about half the class to leave. Then the teacher said, "I'm surprised more of you aren't going." That induced another quarter to depart. To the remaining students, the teacher said, "There's no point continuing with the lesson because so many aren't here." At another high school in Portland, students who chose not to participate in the walkout were required to remain in the library with no books and no computers, a virtual detention. And I just want to add here, I thought one of the least controversial portions of this proposed legislation was this section. This conduct would have been prohibited had the law passed. Teachers segregating students according to race or singling out one racial group of students as responsible for the suffering or inequities experienced by another racial group of students. Frankly, I thought that's pretty non-controversial. We had a public high school teacher in Maine tweeted out that if that were enacted, it would institutionalize white fragility. A curriculum coordinator for another school submitted testimony saying that if that provision seeks to deny historical fact. Now, one can only imagine the level of racial scapegoating and educational malpractice that's going on in those classrooms. Anyhow, despite all of that evidence and testimony, the legislature's Education Committee voted unanimously against the bill, and we never got a roll call vote in the full legislature. But I am not the least bit discouraged, and here's why. The bill sparked an outpouring of public support so intense that even Maine's lying, dying fake news media couldn't ignore it. The debating committee got statewide TV, radio, and newspaper coverage and generated tons of traffic on social media. We intend to harness that energy and frustration. My conservative nonprofit battle tank, Maine First Project, has launched the Forgotten Parents Initiative. Our aim is to engage parents at the local school board level and give them the training and tools they need to push back against leftist indoctrination in the classroom. American public schools have already generated 2 generations of graduates steeped in the toxic brew of identity politics. We cannot afford to let another generation of young Americans to be marinated in leftist politics, ideology, pseudoscience, Christophobia, and racial scapegoating. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fight worth having. Let's get on with it.
Yeah.